Story 1. Hypervigilance means being constantly alert to potential threats, even when it is obvious that none exist at the moment. Story 2. People-pleasing. It gets overlooked because most people are perfectly content to have a people-pleaser around, so they never stop to think, why does Jenny keep doing these things for me? Even when she mentions that she is tired, they just take and keep on taking. Story 3. Having nightmares or visions during the day is a common experience for anyone with post-traumatic stress disorder. It can be extremely scary and confusing. Story 4. As others said, hypervigilance is a good one. Another is looking incredibly disconnected, which can be hypervigilance without showing it. I was described at work as someone who looks like he is never paying attention, but then brings up something specific from a conversation across the room. In reality, I am very attentive due to constantly having words used against me while growing up. Story 5. Anger, lots of anger. Very oppositional over everything. At the same time, the opposite occurs. Very quiet and unwilling to leave the apartment or home. The transitions are unpredictable. They could become angry or start crying. Story 6. They try to turn every situation into a joke because if they are laughing, they are not crying. Story 7. They move without making noise. One day I was in the kitchen cooking, and I turned around to see my roommate using the counter behind me, halfway through making a sandwich. He had gotten bread and toppings, and I had no idea he was there. I asked him how he did that. I thought he was going to say he was Spider-Man or something. Instead, he said, "If my mom heard me or my brother, she would punish us. You never knew what mood she was in, so it was best to be invisible." Story 8. They notice very small changes in the behavior of others. They are extremely good at reading the emotions and escalation triggers of the people around them. Story 9. I get glossy-eyed myself. I cannot focus on what people are saying when it is trivial a lot. It has to do with my post-traumatic stress disorder and numerous losses in my life, as well as my health issues. Story 10. Quickly turning off certain songs, television shows, and similar media with no obvious reason. Certain things can trigger me unexpectedly, such as songs tied to specific memories. I have to turn them off immediately or leave the situation if possible. I do not like explaining the entire experience to people, so it may seem that I intensely dislike certain songs. However, it is because they cause a wave of sadness and fear that I am not yet able to hear in public. Story 11. Apparently, I had an all-or-nothing approach. I worked on that with my therapist. It mostly manifested when I was trying to clean or straighten up. I either had to clean everything that day or nothing would get done. I started working on it when I moved. Instead of telling myself, I have to get the living room unpacked, I allowed it to be a success if I got one thing out of a box. It has definitely helped with feeling overwhelmed all the time, but it is still a work in progress. Probably affects other areas of life, but I am drawing a blank. Story 12. I am a people pleaser and extremely independent. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder due to childhood neglect and abuse. I also have an unhealthy relationship with food. Story 13. Inability to keep up with the demands of daily normal life, such as maintaining employment and keeping a house clean. Trauma has made me feel incompatible with life. Story 14. Not being comfortable making simple decisions that involve other people. I literally freeze if someone asks me to pick out a movie, playlist, or restaurant. I can't do it. I just look closely at everyone else, thinking they hate it and I have ruined everything. Story 15. They are very empathetic. Some people respond to trauma by repressing empathy, but many become caring and understanding. Story 16. Undersharing. When information has been used against you, it is hard to be free and open. Also, if you have gone through something deeply difficult, most people cannot relate and will be very upset and confused if you share your life with them. Story 17. They are funny as hell. Honestly, the funniest people I have met have had to deal with some horrible situations and have a unique perspective on life because of it. This often leads to a great sense of humor and an ability to see the amusing side of the most serious situations. Story 18. Very kind to others. Does not want others to experience what they went through. wants to be a force for good. Story 19. Do not get me wrong, but one of my best employees has an extreme case of insecurity. He doubts and overthinks everything, and because of that, he can check for mistakes in every contract, bill, and email. The guy is bulletproof. Sometimes trauma can take you places. Story 20. Entering a building or room and immediately making a mental note of all points of entry and exit. Preferring to stand or sit near an entrance or exit, ideally with your back to the wall. Preferring to enter and exit quietly without being noticed. Story 21. They are funny as hell. If they are not severely traumatized, then they are at the very least severely depressed, which is, frankly, its own kind of trauma. Story 22. They abuse drugs or alcohol. In my experience, everyone who has been a friend with deep trauma from their past has been an alcoholic. What is worse is that when they are drunk, they become the most awful people. A couple of them were even verbally abusive to me. Another common behavior I have noticed in the people I have known is that they pour themselves into work or projects, resulting in really impressive jobs. Story 23. They might be high-functioning but are internally on edge all the time. A burning desperation is always in their heart. It is almost like their emotions have split from their psyche and they can witness it now. Heavy trauma all the time changes neurotypicality. Story 24. Highly bonded to animals. Traumatized people often find solace in animals because they are not comfortable with people. The man at the party who is hanging out with the dog, or the woman who cannot watch a movie if the dog dies. Human deaths are acceptable. Story 25. Deflecting serious questions with jokes and not answering them is a clear sign they do not want to discuss the topic. The more serious the question they deflect, the heavier the burden. Story 26. Sudden bouts of extreme tiredness. It is actually exhaustion finally making it too hard to keep up appearances that everything is perfectly fine while deteriorating on the inside. Story 27. Does not instigate conflict even when appropriate, but once the total amount of mistreatment crosses a threshold, either leaves or releases the full extent of pent-up appropriate conflict all at once, which may appear to be an overreaction to the abuser and others who ignored the mistreatment. Absolute hatred of jump scares, scary entertainment, and similar content. When one's entire upbringing involved real fear, finding fear entertaining is difficult. Preoccupation with personal safety. Someone who has endured significant hardship and is unwilling to tolerate more may be legally armed, and if you display behaviors they were taught indicate impending violence, you could face defensive measures. Story 28. They do not stress. Things that throw others into a panic just get a shoulder shrug, and then they do what needs to be done. Story 29. Compassion. I know that trauma is not a prerequisite for compassion, but the most compassionate people I know have been through some serious challenges in their lives. Story 30. Being stoic or strong. I was complimented for appearing stoic. When I shared that I was actually having a very difficult time and struggling with loneliness and depression, people were surprised. Usually, people like me were told our emotions were not important or that it was not worth getting upset about, so we self-soothed as a way to cope. People do not know that there is something wrong with us unless we completely lose control or fall apart. Story 31. When people are calm during scary situations but become nervous or anxious in normal settings. Story 32. One that I feel is often overlooked is being overweight. Almost no one is overweight by choice, and many people overeat as a way to cope with trauma. I once heard someone say that people should not look at overweight people with disgust but with empathy because very often it is people who have been hurt in one way or another. Story 33. Long-term stress and depression result in slower thought processes, short-term memory loss, and impaired social functioning. Story 34. Lack of emotional regulation in abusive relationships. No boundaries. Timid. Becomes defensive easily, even if the perceived attack is not real. Story 35. That is me. You have a hurricane, tornado, house burning down, or boyfriend's niece smoking marijuana. I have this, and I will bring sandwiches. Story 36. It depends a lot on what trauma the person might have experienced. Emotionally traumatized people may become tense around others and react anxiously to small discomforts, such as normal disagreements. They develop hypervigilance because their brain is in survival mode constantly, searching for any sign of danger. For example, a person may become overly conscious of how their hands are moving or how they are sitting when around others. They may be unable to maintain eye contact, move too fast, rarely relax, worry about how they are perceived, get defensive or angry over small things, fight response, experience fast heartbeats and difficulty breathing when something negative occurs, anxiety attack, panic frequently, sleep excessively especially after emotionally negative events, freeze response, feel very lazy and unmotivated with a lost will to do anything, also a sign of freeze response, and have heavy mood swings that are emotionally exhausting. They may feel sudden sadness or anxiety out of nowhere. Even if everything seems fine, emotions can hit them intensely and unexpectedly. Overall, it is very difficult for them to feel safe around others because their brain is always on alert. People who have gone through major accidents or one big traumatic event may avoid driving, going out, or may become anxious or panicked when related topics are brought up. It mostly depends on what the person has experienced. Story 37. I have many of these issues. I was somewhat surprised not to see one, though. Dissociation during holidays and feeling like you belong anywhere but where you are, especially on days meant to bring people together. I don't think I'm alone in this. I was just surprised not to have seen it here yet. Story 38. Never asking for help will exhaust every option and then be very apologetic when asking for help. Learned early in life that the only person you can rely on is yourself. Story 39. If it is a person with sexual trauma, they may remain calm until they feel disrespected and used, which could cause them to spiral into a meltdown or become aggressive. Story 40. I need to get some tests done. I have had lifelong depression, but lately the anxiety has been unbearable at times. Story 41. My wife and I were both scrolling through this post, and we kept saying, yep, yep, yep. So I turned to her and said, babe, didn't I tell you we could totally win the Trauma Olympics pairs decathlon with enough left over to enter some individual events too? She said, no way, hun, we'd have to leave the house. I said, sorry. She did too. Story 42. When they are overly forgiving, sadly a lot of my friends are so forgiving, and I know what they have been through. Story 43. Sleep issues lasting for a long period of time. Some people write it off as stress or just being busy. However, I am trauma-informed, and it is usually related to unresolved trauma. Story 44. I have many signs of severe trauma. I am probably being too sensitive and no one cares anyway. Story 45. Thinking the worst of every situation and person. They learned early never to be too hopeful, so the minute something goes wrong or someone does something that raises alarm bells, they flee. Story 46. I cannot tolerate silence or loud noises. There has to be some ambient noise. Always waiting for the other shoe to fall in every situation. Constant apologies. Fear of taking up space and being seen. Story 47. When someone is mean to them, they respond by trying harder to get that person to like them rather than thinking, well, forget you too. Story 48. React quickly to things around them. For example, catching something falling midair during a happy conversation. Try to protect others from danger. Walk very quietly and are mildly annoyed if they make any loud noises that people would consider normal. They consider buying things for themselves a waste of money, even if they have the money or the item is actually necessary. Story 49. Being protective over food. For a long time, I told myself I just don't like people touching or messing with my food. In reality, a few days without food is a feeling you never forget. So touching my food, even if I can get more easily, triggered me beyond reasonable levels. Story 50. People who always try to make everyone laugh or keep things light are sometimes the loudest, most upbeat people in the room. They may be carrying the most pain and just do not want anyone to notice. Story 51. Lying when asked almost any question. They try to ensure you do not get angry at them, no matter how minimal it is. Story 52. Scars from cutting. Scars from cigarette burns. He made up stories saying they were something else. I was sheltered and naive and did not know anything about this. After a few years, he told me, and it made a lot of sense. Now I recognize them. I know people hide their scars and are self-conscious of them and their past. Trauma is something you have to do the hard, painful, scary, never-ending work to avoid drowning under. Story 53. I'll add my 2 cents because why not? As someone already said above, staying calm in emergency situations is important. One recent example is my trip to the Netherlands. I went with a close friend and had to make sure they were safe. I accidentally smoked a bit too much cannabis. The wind felt like ice, and I experienced dissociation, seeing myself from a third-person perspective. My vision was like a series of screenshots instead of a steady stream. We were in public, and I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I was practically on the verge of freaking out or declaring that I needed an ambulance, but I had to hold it together because I couldn't put my friend through that. I managed to ask him to help take me back to the hotel, and I slept it off, thankfully. Another thing is hypervigilance and the struggle to find safety. Whenever I'm home, I constantly check all the doors are locked. The front door is double locked. There was a storm a month or two ago, and I accidentally left some windows open. They caused a draft that opened and closed doors forcefully. The sound of the doors sent me spiraling into a post-traumatic stress disorder episode. It wasn't great. I also react quite autonomously to physical touch I don't expect. If someone touches me on my back or shoulders, I shudder or dodge. I don't know if this applies to others, but I usually message and talk to people with a calm and confident demeanor. If that confidence gets shaken somehow, I quickly fall apart, end up over-explaining, and look like I'm not in control. Maybe that's just my autism. One other thing is being an emotional fortress for friends. I take a lot of pride in being there for my friends to vent to or to feel comfortable venting to me or letting their emotions out. At the same time, I don't want to vent or open up to them for fear of being seen as vulnerable or as someone they don't feel comfortable venting to. Their mental health matters more to me than my own because I know I can handle the difficulties that come my way. Story 54. I do not have any trauma that I can remember, but many of the things here feel very real. What does that even mean? Story 55. Hypervigilance or threat scanning in otherwise non-threatening situations, inability to manage or moderate emotions, people-pleasing, and shutdown when confronted about anything are all signs of nervous system overactivation or underactivation, also known as hyperarousal or hypoarousal. For people with trauma, nervous system dysregulation can occur suddenly. Story 56. Excessive startle reflex generally indicates that at some point in the past, the individual felt trapped or helpless. Story 57. I discovered a few years ago that most people do not have back-to-back nightmares all night every night. In fact, I learned that sweet dreams is not a metaphor or ironic statement. People do have positive dreams that don't end in shame, rejection, or terror. I am almost 40. I have been in serious therapy for years, and it never came up. I have taken sleeping medications for over 20 years. No one ever asked about my dreams. I just thought everyone had nightmares all night. Apparently, having only nightmares is fairly rare. Story 58. If someone always says yes, never sets boundaries, or apologizes for everything, even things that are not their fault, it might not just be them being nice. It can come from growing up in chaos, where they had to constantly keep the peace. Story 59. They apologize constantly for things that are not their fault or do not require apologies, like saying sorry for asking a question, needing help, existing in a space, or for other people's reactions. This automatic response shows they learned early to take responsibility for everyone else's emotions and comfort. Also, people who cannot accept compliments or deflect them immediately. When someone genuinely cannot believe anything good about themselves, that usually comes from somewhere dark. The hypervigilance too, always scanning rooms, knowing where exits are, picking seats facing the door, living as if constantly expecting danger even in safe situations. Story 60. You always hear stories about survivors of childhood sexual abuse becoming somewhat averse to sexual intimacy of any form, but what you don't often hear are stories about survivors becoming hypersexual. They look for any form of sexual intimacy as a coping mechanism from just about anyone who gives them that attention. Story 61. Always on alert in public. Often will catch accidents before they happen or prevent someone from harm. Very intuitive to your feelings and notices even the slightest changes. Story 62. Giving people second and third chances when they do not deserve them because they are used to being treated poorly. Story 63. They stop and stare into space a lot, especially during social situations. I can normally spot military folks by this habit. The head is relaxed, but the body is ready to go at the drop of a hat. Story 64. Hey, so I am in this thread and I do not like it. Reading the top posts and thinking, oh no, I thought I was getting better. I guess I am only better at these things, not healing better. Well, everyone have a great day. Story 65. Not really long term, but if someone goes through something traumatic and completely changes, it is probably not them causing trouble. Thank you, school, for ignoring the signs. Story 66. Reminiscing about the good old days with stories that are told as though they are humorous, but to everyone else they are very obvious times of trauma. Like the time Dad lost his work truck in a snowdrift while driving under the influence. He drove home to get Mom's car to try to tow it out and got that car stuck. So he slept on the front porch because Mom wouldn't let him in, and he went to the hospital with hypothermia on my 6th birthday. Hilarious to me, not so much to others. Story 67. Dead eyes. Your problems do not matter to them because they do not see them as real problems. Depression, disrupted sleep cycles, and a pessimistic worldview are common signs as well. Story 68. They feel nervous when someone notices them. I had a very traumatized housemate ask me, months after moving in, why I looked at his hands so much when we first met. He almost cried when I got him a pump for his alkalized water jugs. Took him a bit to calm down and realize that he was safe. Story 69. Extreme opposites of being jaded and easily crying. Both of them lived for so long in survival mode. Story 70. I am kind to a fault, always trying to please. It is almost impossible for me to say no. I have a dark sense of humor. I know what everyone's footsteps sound like. Without even being aware of it, I can pick up every sound wherever I am. I immediately look for exits and places to hide when I am somewhere new. I constantly think about what if, even when it is not likely to happen. For example, what would I do if a tsunami hit, but I am in the Midwest? I do not trust anyone. If someone is nice to me, then they obviously want something. I never let my pain be an inconvenience and often tell no one at all. I can tell when someone's mood shifts. If they are in a bad mood, then I retreat. I try to remain unseen because if they do not notice me, then they will not hurt me. I have barely any memories from my childhood. Story 71. There are phases to it. If someone does not have a lot of real support, they will eventually withdraw and become isolated. At this point, they may look like a hermit or antisocial. Story 72. The inability to organize their home results in a chaotic environment. Although sanitary, nothing is ever put away or organized into drawers or shelves. Toys are scattered all over the floor. Story 73. When you give them a high five, they flinch and quiver as if they are going to be hit. True story. Hyperindependence, not wanting help, projecting an air of perfect confidence to shield from pain. Conversely, hyperdependence and insecurity can vacillate between both depending on the type of emotional flashback. Serious, life-threatening self-sabotage and learned helplessness in response to potential success or good things happening. I bailed out of a mid-level technology job because I feared surpassing my father's paycheck. Starved myself so badly to numb my feelings I almost died. Lapsing into psychosis multiple times because your body and mind are so petrified at fully understanding and processing years of cumulative, extreme trauma that it has to create its own internal reality to escape the current one. Very clever adaptation, really, but dismantles your life real fast. An emergency exit for your brain. I've had to play this psychosis game 3 times in 7 years, twice involving catatonic freezing, in the same way an antelope freezes in a lion's jaws to numb itself before its inevitable death. I felt like this about my own mother. And when I am reeling from witnessing my own brain dismantle its cognitive functions and reality testing for the sake of survival, my aunt calls me a plague. A plague. For being sick because I happen to absorb my own family's sick behavior. Being strangely comfortable with extremely uncomfortable conditions, including lack of food, water, extreme heat, cold, and physical and emotional pain. Not making any noise or fuss when injured, hungry, ill, or tired. I was so scared to laugh audibly that I laughed without using my vocal cords as a teenager. I eventually grew out of it, but damn, perfectionism to an extreme extent. For decades, overwork, 125% effort over years. Then burnout. Yep. Being super touchy because of being touch-starved your whole life. You've been thirsty for touch your whole life. A stroke of the hand feels like opium. A kiss feels like hard drugs. You get the idea. Being really into sex. Hypersexual. Craving all intimacy. All the time. Using sex as medicine to regulate your emotional dysregulation. Being overly nurturing and gentle to everyone and everything to compensate for the complete lack of nurturing you received at home. Giving people second chances they certainly should not have. Trying to see some sliver of good in everyone, even sociopathic Machiavellian psychopaths. Yep. And over-explaining their bad behavior. I think the worst one is feeling inherently pathological or defective. You cannot accept compliments. It is such a lie, but decades of lies will make you believe the distorted false lens they have projected into you. Yeah, constant emotional abuse and neglect did a number on me. I practically raised myself. A veteran of abuse of sorts. Most gifted, ambitious, and sensitive person in my family. One of two people in my family with a postgraduate degree. I was also a fashion model and singer-songwriter. I was the artist, the scapegoat child in a family of actual narcissistic personality disorder, alcohol, and pop culture worshippers. My delicate, emotional world was never nurtured. Their insecure jealousy made me hate myself and almost succeed in taking my life for most of my life. It took an almost deadly suicide attempt 7 months ago to actually make me go. I was actually a really cool person with so much to offer. I hated my own clever brain because jealous people attacked its potential. I could have gone to Mensa. Like Matilda, I was punished for being smart. My academic potential was sneered at, even though I loved learning. I used to watch that film and wish that I had a Miss Honey to come and adopt me. Or that I had supernatural powers besides being a really resilient punching bag. I'm actually kind of scared I have ruined my own potential and will not get this person back. I destroyed my body and possibly mind from eating disordered behavior, preemptively attacking myself before anyone else could. I hope to God she can come back. I just want to nurture my child self and get her the hell away from her family of origin. My childhood, teenage years, and young adulthood were ostensibly ruined. My whole life, actually. Also anger. I was never allowed to express anger. My feelings were stupid and did not matter. Ever. So now I get these surges of deep, seething anger. I am so angry at my own parents. My family is so pathetic they attacked the most emotionally healthy, stable person with projections of their own self-hatred. Man, God, that felt great to write. Story 74. My new habit is being an avid reader. It is a form of escapism and can be quite intense. It goes beyond binge-watching television shows. It is a constant escape into another reality, especially fantasy or science fiction, which helps avoid facing one's own reality. I listen to audiobooks in the car and during mindless tasks at work. I bring my Kindle to lunch, and the moment I am home with a free second, I escape into another story. I cannot be the only one. Story 75. They get the look when recounting what they thought was simply a humorous incident that occurred in normal families. You mean it is not normal to hear, "You are nothing," followed by a slap to the face? Not everyone experiences that. Story 76. You touch their shoulder and they flinch. One of my second graders did this last year, and yes, there was a terrible story behind it. Story 77. My former husband told me if the house collapsed in a magnitude 6.0 earthquake, I would be out on the front lawn setting up a tent and triage. But the little things made me crazy. Story 78. Anger outbursts, gaslighting, and narcissism are all characteristics that Reddit often criticizes. That person probably has trauma. Does it justify their mistreatment of others? Of course not. But it is helpful to acknowledge that their behaviors come from a deep place of pain. Story 79. Indifference. It is not really indifference. It is bone-weary depression. I am so tired all the time. Is that all there is? I am Generation X and have suffered from all of the symptoms above. People-pleasing, which is impossible to do with a narcissistic mother. Hypervigilance for decades. Self-isolating. And now, I just do not care about anything anymore. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.